Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Static Feedback, brought to you by CloudCannon, the visual CMS for Teams. I'm joined today by Joost van der Schee of useq.com, and Joost is a proponent of what he calls artisanal web development. We'll let him explain this, but I'll welcome him now. Hello, Joost, and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad to have you join us. You've been using static websites, I know, for some time. But perhaps before we get into artisanal web development, would you be able to explain to me a bit about your background as a coder, as a web developer, and then we can look at when you made that switch into static site generators.
Yeah, nice. I went to university in the Netherlands, and I studied industrial design engineering. So I was not actually doing something with computers, or not programming at least. But I was very interested in web development, and I got into Photoshop and designing websites first, and soon. My brother, who was doing a computer study in university, said, "Well, maybe you can also learn CSS, so do some front end stuff like that." And that's how I came into the business of web design and web development. So it actually started with design, and then slowly it turned into coding, CSS, coding. HTML, JavaScript.
How did out of interest, how did you find CSS when you came to it from an industrial design background? Because you have the design thread that follows through, but
right. Well, I didn't know much about coding, so I was happy with anything that worked. I mean, background red was great, and also what I really liked about web design, as opposed to what I was learning in school and university, was you can do this alone. So we needed whole teams for creating products that actually you had to manufacture them in a factory, and you had to have all these regulations. And this was something you could do just in your room on your own. You could build something that's actually being used by people, which was which I really liked. That was a big plus for me.
I found that too. That's the magic of that early static in the 90s when that was the way to make a website. You just did everything and you hand coded everything, and magical that you could do it by yourself. That this seemed, to me as a child at the time, I'm doing something that a grown up should be able to do. That this is a big deal. So what were you using when you first made your first websites? What platforms were you using?
Well, Macromedia was big then, and yes. Flash, and we were doing Flash because I was learning. I don't even remember, but some sort of alternative to Flash in school. And then we, for the web, we used Flash because it was every browser had Flash in it. So and then soon after that, or maybe at the same time, we were building HTML websites with these Flash components. We had the titles were rendered as Flash because then you could use fancy types, fancy fonts, and stuff like that. And so I think that's how it started. Macromedia was big, so I used a CMS that's called Contribute. Right. And it was built on top of Dreamweaver, I think, or as part of Dreamweaver.
Oh yes, okay, yep.
You could make editable areas. It reminds me. CloudCannon is doing the same with these editable classes, but. Yeah, that was what we were using, and then you run on your computer. You installed this software. We were earning money with reselling this software, and then people installed it on their Windows computer and by FTP updated their websites. It was really slow then.
Yeah. So everything. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it occurred to me recently that everything was offline, and until you push the site elsewhere.
Right.
But you could still have that wonderful editable region. You could at the time have what was essentially a visual editor.
Yeah, Macromedia was good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. With the limitations
of sort of inline editing.
Yeah, that's right. And how did you make the switch to static? Was it Jekyll that you first came to?
Yeah, well, after Macromedia, I did a lot of CMS made easy, which was a PHP framework, open source CMS. But I did that for a few years, and then WordPress came along, and everybody jumped onto WordPress, and I did the same thing. So I did that for about 5 years, I think, and then I found Jekyll. I think in 2015 or something, maybe a little later. I'm not sure anymore, but somewhere there, and started. Yeah, I was enthusiastic about Jekyll. For different reasons. First of all, the simplicity. I love that. So sorry about the the simplicity. I really love that one, and the efficiency you could get with just building plain text files and making a website out of it. And we were doing 5 years of WordPress, so we had all kinds of issues, like hosting issues. Spend a lot of money on hosting, managed hosting, because we had security issues there. So we wanted to offload the security issues to some sort of hosting company, which cost, well, not us, but our customers a lot of money each year. And I thought that's a shame, because maybe I could earn that money. It would be great. So there was a chance there, opportunity.
Yeah. And so under the hood, I mean, we're getting closer to this concept of artisanal web development, but under the hood then in Jekyll, were you seeing more than you could see in WordPress?
Yeah, I was, because I was not really educated as a programmer. I really had the need to understand everything. That was I really wanted to get how it all worked. But it was impossible because there was so much to learn. Remember, I only knew a little bit of CSS at the beginning, and then later, I understood how WordPress worked. But I started with changing WordPress themes, so installing WordPress theme and then changing the CSS. Later, I understood how PHP worked, so I could actually dive in and actually change the code. And even later, I created my own themes, but. This was a gradual process, and I really wanted to understand every bit of it, which led me ultimately to, if you want to understand everything, you want it also to be as simple as possible. Yes. So I was really obsessed with making it easier to understand for myself.
Yeah. And that translates to, once it's easier to understand and simple for yourself, you can optimize for load speed, for everything, all of these Lighthouse scores that we most of us are to some degree obsessed with, getting a couple of point difference in the Lighthouse. Let's start defining this term. So you came up, you said you wanted to talk about artisanal web development, which I love. I love this idea that that code, that websites can be something that are finely crafted, that are handcrafted, and completely fit for purpose, with no extra craft, nothing else happening that doesn't need to happen. So what does it mean to you to be an artisanal developer?
Well, I think what I think is most important is that you understand every line of code. So every line of code that goes into your project, you should be able to tell what it does. And well, you're not. You don't have to, but I really want to. That's my urge to really understand it all, and the power that comes to when you can create the same thing with less code, or with a simpler solution. That was what really struck me, or really what I really liked, and that's why I stuck with this thing to really. And I saw that other people liked it as well. And with that, especially in the Jekyll age, when 2015, I think Jekyll started in 2012 or something, or 11, I'm not sure. So in 2015, that was already one of the bigger static site generators. And what you got was you were able to build a website with just a little bit of code, push it to GitHub pages, do very little, and actually get a lot. which was great. And it was not complicated at all. It was not, there were no classes full of PHP or whatever. So
Yeah.
it was really, and what I saw was, especially from India and all around also Europe, you saw a lot of people interested in this very lean technology. So yeah, I really, I forgot your exact question, but that's what really triggered me into this artisanal web development.
Yeah.
And what to me it means know every line of code, and what you said, no extra stuff in there that you either don't know how it works or you don't need. So because code always needs maintenance.
That's right, and it needs other people to understand it too. And I mean, we've talked off camera about this, but the benefit as a solo coder or someone who is responsible for a website through the life cycle of the site, that is not just making it and handing it off, but you'll jump back in and make updates as the client requests it or as you want to change it. You need to know, or you need to be commenting your code, but quite a lot.
Yeah. Have you ever had the issue that somebody asks you, is this software able to do this thing? This one thing. It's like, well, maybe not, but maybe then I can code it.
Yeah.
So, but we're used to asking these kind of questions because we use these sort of standard solutions that do certain things, do and don't do other things.
That's right.
But once you program it yourself, you're like, okay, so this there's a, I don't know, slider that skips every next one, or I don't know. Can it do that? Yeah, obviously it can. You need to code it, right? So, but it's very general thing to ask. Are you able to do this, or are we able to do that? And I think when you actually code the thing yourself, you're able to do everything your client asks. So, I mean, within their limitations of their fantasy, because they obviously think it's a website. So
yeah, and I think
they won't ask you anything.
That's another appeal of static to me, is that everything can run on CSS and HTML, and you can add JavaScript as you need it. But anything that those languages or frameworks allow is possible within that constraint of what should be possible on a site.
Right. But then you really need to really understand CSS. Really need to understand HTML. Really need to understand JavaScript.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. If you load in some component and you don't really understand what it does, and somebody says, "Oh, can you make it skip a slide every now and then?" And it's like, no, I wouldn't know how to do that because I'm not like I was in the beginning. I only knew CSS. So if you ask me to do something in JavaScript, I would say, I don't know. No, I can't do that. I can only make the color change.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe that's where we can start talking about the no-code movement, which relies on a GUI, a graphical user interface, to allow you to choose, check a box, skip a slide every 2 slides or every 3 slides, but that is behind the scenes. Someone has thoughtfully, artisanally coded that option in, and then only limited the options to the user. So there's a bit of a disjunct probably between code, no code, and artisanal comes over closer to code, and then the website builders and kind of component-based coding can come in as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because what do you think is no code? If you talk about no code, there's so much no code. You could say web components are no code. Well, they're actually coded. So Are they code? Are they no code? There's this whole discussion about it.
It's really difficult. I've been listening to no code podcasts recently, and the way it is sold in this no code ecosystem, as they call it, it's as though anyone can do anything, limited only by their imagination. But I would add limited by the services that they're hooking together and the APIs that are actually talking to each other. And there's an immense amount of coding happening behind the scenes in these no-code platforms, obviously. But you're relying on services, and you're relying on probably paid services, monthly costs for every single thing you're hooking together. On some level, once you reach a certain level of requests, a certain level of calls, someone will be paying. And I guess the hope,
Right, which is a good thing because the coders need to be paid.
absolutely,
So,
yeah. But the way that no code is sold is that, hey, everything's free, you can hook it together, and you've got a mobile app that you've just made by dragging and dropping and dragging a little arrow from one service to one provider, and it's very exciting the way it's sold or the way it's described. And I can see how for some startups, and it might be a great way to have a lean startup. If you're moving from, I mean, we wireframe quite a lot when we're designing, and then a developer jumps in and works on the wireframe, actually enacts that design. Wireframing feels like a no-code site. It's not functional at all, but we're starting that process. But then we have human coders in the chain that jump in and know what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
I believe that the no code definitely has its place. So yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I even said to one of my clients, I said, "Oh, you should try this no code solution." So I absolutely believe that no code has its place in the whole, just like artisanal web development has its place in the whole area of web development. And what I like about the artisanal way of building things is, like, when you have smaller projects, when you have a small project you do by yourself, you can, and you have this lean technology, then you can really have an efficient way of building this lean thing.
Yes.
So obviously when we're talking about platforms and teams of people, and that doesn't, it doesn't work in that situation. But in this one person building this lean thing, it could become very efficient, and you could also make smart choices in a situation of static site generators. For example, for hosting, you can make smart choices, and having this lean code that you fully understand and is cheap to host is a very powerful combination. And that's why what I like about the artisanal web development, or knowing every line of code, or how you want to name this thing.
Yes.
And I'm not alone. So that's interesting, because it's not that I found a Jekyll and thought, oh, let's do artisanal web development, or let's know every code. Sure, I was curious, but I also found you might not need jQuery, for example, which is a website from HubSpot. I found it. It's like, okay, but I use jQuery for everything. We all work. And I was like, oh, do I really not need it? I thought I needed it. Just same with Twitter Bootstrap. I thought I needed that, because otherwise, how will my buttons ever be consistent between browsers?
Yes.
I didn't know how that worked. So it's like, oh, this is just a little bit of CSS. But I think, and that's another interesting post. That's one from I recently read that. Geoff Graham, I think, on CSS Tricks, who wrote something about the web is good now. I mean, the web was horrible back then. It was different on every browser, so we had a hard time doing this, and now we have it's much easier to get this consistency. So I was finding out that all these things were actually not needed, and I could do it myself. And I was fortunate that the web evolved with me at the same speed, that
That's
I
right.
was.
Well,
parts
of the web, anyway. I mean, I remember quite well that you used to be able to make a website and say this is best displayed on Firefox version so and so, and at a certain screen width, and people would nod and maybe find another computer or spin up another browser, and
90% used use Internet Explorer. And
that's right. And I want to pick up on this idea of the lean site, and hashtag lean web is something that we kind of joke about here at CloudCannon, because that fits in quite well with the way we want the web to be. We want it to be accessible. We want people to be able to load it with as fast as possible, with as little bandwidth burden on the user as possible. And I know that you're very conscious of the JavaScript, the weight that you're serving. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, how you reduce your page weights.
Okay, how I reduce them?
Yeah.
Because a short thing about why. So I read the HTTPR guide, the Web Almanac that comes out every year, and I read it, and then I'm stunned by the amounts of JavaScript and HTML and CSS that's being served. It's like, oh, how can you do that? Or the amount of images or video I get. But so that's the reason I get started there. But then I found out they were at first they were communicating averages, which was wrong. They had to do median.
Yeah.
And they were doing averages. So they were like, and there were these articles like next year websites will be average more than 3 megabytes each page load will be more than 3 megabytes. We're not even there yet in median.
Yeah.
So then they changed the average to median and said, okay, that's not really fair to do the average, because if you have one really heavy site, it will influence the average a lot. So they changed the median, and then I said, okay, so the problem is less big as I thought, but that was the reason to get into looking at page weight also. And how did I do it? Well, actually, how I do it is I write everything myself. So I stopped using Bootstrap, which loads jQuery, which was 100 kilobytes. Okay, if you gzip it, it will be smaller, but it loads 150 kilobytes of CSS. And if I wrote it myself, I wouldn't come any further than 15 kilobytes because I had limited time. I had to build a website within a few days. So what I ended up with really small CSS files, really small JavaScript. I mean snippets. It's like, okay, what do I need to toggle this thing? Okay, I can load the whole Bootstrap thing, or I can just write toggle, add a class toggle, or whatever. So I think I found this way of doing it lightweight, and then I ran some speed tests with Lighthouse, etc. And I'm like, okay, so this works really well. And then I thought, well, maybe I should market this also as me being web expert, web performance expert. So actually focusing on web performance, which I like, because there's this other issue, me being not a thought programmer, but just self-made. Like how do you evaluate the quality of your own work? So I found Lighthouse, which CloudCannon also likes to refer to. It's a sort of a quality mark. It's like, oh, this is really good. It scores 100 or something. Yeah. Like, we never know what that means, but but that sounds good, right? So I like to build this website, then do the score, and then maybe optimize it a bit, and then send to the customer. Said, well, Google thinks it's a nice website. Look. Yeah. So it gives me some confidence on the quality of the work.
It's great to have an external metric like that. I know there's a lot of chatter about the value of a Lighthouse score and exactly what it means. Right. Is the top 2%, is that more important than losing 2% further down? Like, is it progressively harder to reach? All of these things, but being able to point to something you made yourself and know that it's better than the last one you made, or to be able to show a client that, hey, this Google thinks it's good.
Decent.
That's right. Yeah. I did a good job, and we know that Google is going to rank slightly better. We're not quite sure exactly how much better, but it will have some impact for a client who's concerned about SEO and about ranking. I think there's immense value in having that kind of external metric.
I think we have this whole field of we don't realize when we're in. I mean, especially here in the Netherlands. I'm in Amsterdam. I'm from Amsterdam. And here in the Netherlands, we have super fast internet, and I'm in Amsterdam, which is on the internet, Amsterdam Internet Exchange, very close. It's a few streets away. So the internet here, even the last part, is really quick. So I can get crazy speeds. I can get a full website load in 0.1 seconds. I write about it on my blog, and then I realized that I'm probably the only one getting this, because I'm in this country and I live very close to the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, etc. Yes. And I host on a server somewhere here in Amsterdam, so I can get these crazy fast speeds, but we don't realize that there are people on the other side of the planet, also trying to visit this website. And maybe you can use a CDN, but they still have this last piece of internet that's really slow, and we have to build for that.
It's always the last mile, isn't it? And that's the problem. I mean, that we found that the rise of, for example, the electric scooter services across the world, that they were solving that last mile problem between public transport. Like even if you have a great public transport, great fast internet, it's solving the last bit of copper wiring from your house or your office to the exchange. And that's another great reason. And I think clients maybe need to be reminded sometimes that this is who you build for. You're not building for office to office or necessarily the business to business connection, because generally a business would, in theory, have a faster connection. Another benefit of the lean web.
I remember being on a holiday in France and now we have some regulation here in Europe, but then they were not they didn't have to do roaming on each network. So I was on this holiday park, and I only could use this certain type of 4G or 3G or whatever it was, and it was so slow. And then I realized, okay, so this is what other people must see when they browse the internet.
Yeah.
So I had to go somewhere and then hold my phone like this, and the whole,
Yeah.
But and then I had some lights websites that were really, and they were actually loading perfectly fine because they go in packages, and if your package is under 14 kilobytes or something, it's just one trip, one round trip.
Yeah.
But if it's 300 kilobytes, it would just not load because that's so many round trips, and it wouldn't happen at all. Yeah. It's an interesting experience. And then I thought, okay, so it actually matters, not to a lot of people, maybe not to me, maybe not to my friends, but it can actually matter. And for me, I just like it when it's really fast. And that's what the e-commerce reports say. If your website is selling something and it's just really fast, people have less time to think about it, and it just
That's right. And I mean those stats I find amazing. That that there's so many billions of dollars lost by a slow loading website or by a website that doesn't function as intended or as it was tested maybe locally. I know I do this too. Like if I'm trying to buy something, it doesn't work straight away, I'll think, well, I'm not going to do it now. I might come back. Right. There's always that delay. Like if I can't have that instantaneous instant gratification.
What does the other website? Let me check that again.
Yeah, that's right.
And if it happened already, it's like you bought it already. It's done. I'm not sure how that exactly works, but there's a lot of reports on it.
Yeah, that's right. You've written recently, quite recently, a couple of days ago, about code as poetry, and you have this deep dive into the new a WordPress front page. I wonder if you can talk a bit more about this, because I know that one thing I heard you talk at HugoConf in July about image optimization, and that relates to page weight, and it relates to how much you serve and versus what a person actually wants to see. I wonder if you might want to talk about code as poetry a little bit and the WordPress example.
Right. I'll start with code as poetry. So you understand probably that I like code and I like to understand everything. So I like my code to be concise, to be beautiful, to be, for me at least, to be understandable, and so that that I don't do obsolete things or do things when I write code, I want to write it as short as possible. I think everybody wants that as a programmer, so that should resonate. But so I found this code is poetry line on the footer of the new WordPress website. So I looked at this page, and then I found Matt Mullenberg, the CEO from WordPress.com, from Automatic, saying something negative about this design, and it's like, they built it in 33 days, and then there were people jokingly making videos online recreating that page in 20 minutes. Yeah. And what I thought, okay, they did that with Gutenberg, with the WordPress builder.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, maybe I can do that without Gutenberg in 15 minutes. I tried, I failed miserably. It didn't work at all. Yeah. It got beautiful. It became beautiful, but it took me about an hour or something to do it. Right. So I thought that's not really a statement. Like, okay, I can do it in an hour. Okay, whatever. They did it in 20 minutes. So they already won, and they did great. But that was not the reason. So I looked at the whole thing and thought, okay, so is this actually good? They did. It took them 33 days. This is actually good, and that's the thing. I always look at page. I look at the page weight. I look at the amount of CSS it loads, the amount of JavaScript, etc. So I was looking, and they loaded a lot of CSS, like really a lot of CSS, and I'm like, okay, so why are they doing this? And then I found some quote in their development page that said they were building custom Gutenberg blocks. So I was like, why are they building custom Gutenberg blocks? Probably because they built this page by using Gutenberg blocks themselves.
Yeah.
Which was actually what they did. I strongly believe that. And they loaded all the CSS that belonged to all these different blocks. Obviously, a lot of CSS and very little JavaScript, by the way. But then I thought, okay, so if these are the standard blocks, how do they behave, and does this content actually fit in every screen size, etc.? So I started messing around with it, and I found a few bugs or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And then I thought, okay, so if I would have written this, I would have tested this, because I wouldn't have used standard components, I wouldn't have standard breakpoints, I would use the correct ones, etc. So then I thought, okay, that's interesting, because if code is poetry, to me, that would mean you would have an eye for these things, and you would make this all work perfectly.
Yeah.
And they just did this approach, which I like, because I like dogfooding your own stuff. I mean, I think that's should be applauded. Yeah, I love that. So I like what the volunteers did. But it also gave me an opportunity to look at code as poetry from that angle. And okay, so I would have done this differently. I would have done that differently. And I would have loaded less CSS, because these Gutenberg blocks are all not used. Why would you load CSS for all of them?
Yeah, and I mean, I've recently become aware of. I hadn't heard of Purge CSS before. I think June or July this year, and being able to strip out everything you're not using and just retain the classes that you use, I think it's a great approach. But until
shaking.
Until WordPress kind of shakes the tree a little bit more of the extraneous classes, I think we're going to be shipping, or they will be shipping a lot more.
But that's a perfect optimization. So that that's the one you should be doing. But having an eye for that and actually doing it is the next thing, and it needs to be done before it's actually poetry, right? Absolutely. Now it's just a whole book, and I know there's a poem somewhere, but we haven't found it yet.
Well, famously, I'm just reminded of my own education in poetry. T.S. Eliot wrote The Wasteland, and then Ezra Pound came along and stripped out whole sections, and he needed an editor to make it poetry compared to the first draft, which was a lot bigger and a lot weightier and didn't carry the same emotional appeal, I think. I think poetry is constraint, and it's being restrained and knowing you're working within a form, and then you can bring the meaning to that form, or the creativity to that form. And we've talked again off camera about having a creative constraint. It makes you more creative, or it makes you think more about what you're doing.
Right. There are a lot of constraints that could be valid and could be useful for that. For example, you could have a size constraint. I was talking about the round trips.
Yes.
You could do all kind of things that you put on yourself, constraints you put on yourself to say, okay, so this is what I want to do. For example, I always want to write my own layouts. I used to do Bootstrap, but now with columns, etc. And then you could easily, without writing any CSS, make any layout you could think of. But now I want to write them myself and write my own breakpoints and do that, custom for every website. So it's kind of a constraint you put on yourself, and then because you believe that your poem is getting better by doing it, and it's sort of a you want to make it more beautiful and more.
That's right, and there's always that that reality intrudes at some point. There's always the point where you have to stop polishing. It's good enough or it's fast enough, But if you keep looking, there are always improvements you could make, but you're getting down to like saving 1 kilobyte or half a kilobyte, and at a certain point, probably it's good enough.
Right. I have a nice story about it from my own website. So I wanted to load only one CSS file, and it should be under 40 kilobytes, and I should load one HTML file under 40 kilobytes and one JavaScript file. And okay, so I succeeded, no problem, obviously. But then I had this idea of this Japanese art and as cool with leaves and natural and like your background. Like, gives it some human touch. Yeah. And it was really, really not, there was no human touch at all. But, I found beautiful SVG, but they were really big. And somebody suggested I should compress them heavily. But I found this other solution that I would actually load them. And then I would asynchronously load them in after the user moved their mouse or whatever, but I would know that they're actually there, and then I would asynchronously load.
And I really enjoy that approach.
There's always this, I wanted to get that 100% score. I had all these constraints for myself.
Yes.
But I wanted to also have this beautiful plant in the background. So and then I have a post about it. It's called Monkey Business with banana leaves, but it's monkey business. I mean, I just faked the whole thing.
Yeah, but I mean, there's something appealing. I think as long as it's not done too much, there's something appealing about having an async load when a user's there, because it feels as a user that the site is responding to you on some level. The other little thing I enjoy, and I wanted to ask you about this, I haven't asked you this before, you've recently added in a little face that follows the cursor around right at the bottom of your posts.
Right.
And I really enjoy it, and I'm wondering what the weight of that is. And
the weight?
Yeah, and why, like, what's the trade-off for you? You have this fun little thing that's a bit of interaction versus a little bit more weight, or a little bit of something happening.
It's 20 lines of code.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be 1 kilobyte, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't care. It's I like it. But what I do, if it's not on the homepage, for example, so if you load the page, it load most of the times you load the homepage first, which will load in your CSS, which is loaded again, obviously on the other pages, but already cached. So that's not extra weight.
Yep.
So then there's this. There's this 1 kilobyte extra for this funny, avatar thingy. And then, that's in the page. It's probably even inlined there, so that it's not on every page. So it's not on the portfolio pages, only on the blog pages.
I think so, yeah.
And on the blog pages, there are no images, because
Yep.
I don't load images on my blog page. I always do them with the Lightbox and then load them after somebody clicks. So there are a lot of trade-offs there, as you can hear. I do a lot of trade-offs, but then 1 kilobyte for something funny, I think it's worth it.
That's right. Yeah, I think so. And I think the amount of times when I read your blog and I just spend, it's always about 10 seconds where I just kind of run the cursor around it and then over it just to see what happens. And I know what happens, but it's a bit of fun.
It winks at you when
that's
it's
right.
not looking away.
Yeah.
When it's not looking away. So if it's looking like this, and then one wink, only wink at you.
Yep, it's lovely. It brings a bit of joy, and it honestly, as a user, it makes you pause for a little bit and think about what you've just read while you're playing. For anyone listening, watching, this is useq.com. The blog there in particular is where I noticed this little face. If you want to check it out, I'll add in, I think we have a link in the description already to useq.com, so you can follow Joost and see what he's working on. We're approaching the end of our talk here, Joost, but I wanted to ask you briefly where the artisanal approach falls apart, or where it is not so useful. You've talked about it being great as a solo developer, as someone who is responsible for a site through the life cycle of the site. Where would it not be that useful, do you think? Because obviously not everyone does this.
No, I think a lot of people don't do it. So most people don't. I think Chris Ferdinand, Jeremy Keith. There's some names that in the field that like this approach. Eric Wassel, he's a vanilla AS guy. But there are also a lot of people, and most people out there are not using it, and there are many reasons for it. Most of it is because of handoff. So hand over. Like I build a project and I have to do this together with somebody else, or I have to hand it over to somebody else. If I do my own thing, my own approach to how I do layouts, my own approach to how I do toggle menus, whatever, I'm just talking websites here. But the other one has to, learn that approach, has to read my code. Maybe it's not that readable. Maybe I've written it really concise, so concise it's not even readable anymore. Or maybe I'm just a bad programmer. Who knows? It's hard to do the handover. So in a team, nobody will allow the other one to do artisanal web development. It's just, use this framework. So I know, so there's a book, so there's documentation, so there's, I can read into this thing. I know how it works. I think a lot of people are not allowed / able / in a position to do this. But it's really fun. So that's, everybody's listening. I want to invite you to do this on your own project. But yeah, when you're in a team, please don't, because you'll offend people. I work on teams sometimes. Then we use frameworks. They don't like me to do my own stuff there.
Well, the only other option then is just commenting every line, which is just going to take way too much time. And certainly when you're handing off to someone who, a client developer, for example, who is going to want to change it later, add new classes, do something different. It doesn't make sense. I think you're right. But I love this. I love the analogy. We've talked about this as the analogy of knowing what's happening under the hood of your car, right? And was perhaps easier with an older car where it wasn't computerized and everything wasn't so constrained by a block. But being able to know the tool in your hand, know the line of code, to see how it works, see how it interacts with other pieces. And obviously there are cars that you don't want to do that to. There are the cars that are perhaps finely tuned by someone else, or you rely on it. You rely on it so much. Yeah.
Find this occasion car to work on, because it's really fun to do. I mean, that's right. Just my other takeaway for this.
Yeah.
Don't do it in your big company project, because you'll make people angry. But on the old car, the old timer, yeah, sure. Yeah. Or on this personal portfolio blog, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I love the power of it.
And I do it for clients, but I work alone, so yeah.
Yeah, I probably love analogies too much, but you always see engineers or mechanics, people who work on cars as their day job. They'll often have a project car, right? And that's the one they spend hours. They machine the part themselves. They'll make it perfect. They could buy it in, they could bring in something that someone else has made, but no, they want to turn the lathe. They want to get everything perfect. Make it themselves, know how it works, know exactly everything about it. Yeah, wonderful. I think that's a great note to end on, Joost. I wonder, so where can, if people are interested in finding out more about your work or what you do or what you think, where can people find you?
I have this website, juiceq.com, which is my company website. It has an RSS feed, thanks to Gav Kirk, who reminded me, aggressively that I should have one.
Yeah.
I also built Hugo codecs, where because I reuse my own code, obviously. Everybody loves a good component, even artisanal made ones. I have Jackal codecs, which is a website on Jackal development. It kind of stalled on building new things there because I'm basically focusing on Hugo nowadays. But they both have a blog, so occasionally I write something there, and you can sign up to the RSS feed.
Fantastic.
That's the easiest way to follow it.
Excellent. So useq.com and Jekyll Codex and Hugo Codex. I'll add the links to our description if they're not there. And I wanted to say thank you also for Hugo Codex. I found it very useful. I'm digging more into Hugo since HugoConf and the build up to that. It's been a lot of fun working through examples and using code from you as well. So thank you very much. Well, that's us for this month. Next month we'll have another interesting guest in the static world. Thank you once more to Joost van der Schee of useq.com.